everybody. Welcome to Bible Study That Doesn't Suck. This is Pastor Megan. I am at Grace Lutheran in San Francisco at the corner of 33rd and Ulloa. That's U-L-L-O-A. It's a weird word. We worship every Sunday at 10:30 a.m. www.gracesf.com and other such things. And in Denver.
I am not in Denver.
Oh, sorry. Colorado.
Thank you very much.
I'm sleepy.
And you said where your church is too geographically. I never do that, so now I feel like I have to say that. I am Pastor Dan Tisdell. I am at First Lutheran Church of Gypsum, Colorado, which is in the mountains of Colorado, kind of near Vail, Colorado. And our Sunday service is at 9 a.m. on Sunday, and our church is located at the corner of 2nd and Eagle Street, old downtown Gypsum. I've never said that before on Bible Study.
Old downtown Gypsum.
The old downtown Gypsum, yes. It's a lovely old church that was built in 1890. We're going to celebrate our 130th anniversary this next year. It's kind of cool. And our Facebook page and our all one word, First Lutheran of Gypsum, G-Y-P-S-U-M. Come out and check us out. Yeah.
Yeah, the reason I told people where I was is everyone thinks that I'm at Grace Episcopal, which is a very fancy church, and in fact, I'm at a very tiny church.
I know that church. It's
Lutheran.
Pretty cool.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Bible Study That Doesn't Suck, where we can't promise that we won't suck, but what we mean when we say that is that we won't intentionally inflict spiritual abuse on anyone, that we're going to err on the side of justice, and that we're going to look at these texts in light of what's actually happening in present day, not necessarily just thinking about a fixed moment of time and expecting you to live your life or change everything about who you are and what you stand for and how you self-identify to understand this biblical text. Sorry, my camera keeps focusing and unfocusing. I just have that kind of face, I guess. The first reading that we'll talk about is from the book of Isaiah.
Whoop, whoop.
Yeah. Isaiah is one of those texts that goes up and down in terms of sliding from being mad that there's not more justice in the world to thinking God is awesome and you shouldn't question God about why there's not more justice in the world. So Isaiah goes from angry to happy to angry. This part of the text is talking about the anointing of a person named Cyrus, who was a ruler of Persia from 558 to 530 BCE. I don't just know that. I'm reading it from a thing because I suck at numbers.
I was wondering. I'm like, I couldn't have done that, but.
Yeah. Let's see.
Hey, I'll just jump in.
You talk because I'll tell you guys at the beginning of this that I am sleepy because my kids are afraid of monsters and they keep waking up. And I think I figured it out last night. It's the sound of the cats scratching in the litter box that they think is the monsters. So yeah, I figured it out, but sorry, I'm sleepy. You talk for a second.
So I'm going to have to do a little bit of a little history lesson about Isaiah for a second. And that is, Isaiah is at least was written at 3 different time periods, probably not by the same person. I think sometimes we assume that books were written by just one person, but they're clearly talking about sort of different eras that went as much as maybe 100 years or more, 120 years or more. And the first part of it has to do with this. They're sort of expecting that they're going to be in this time of sort of conflict, and then they are made prisoners and exiled to Babylon. And then the second part has to do with their time in Babylon, and this is in that second part. And then the last time is when they return back and try to rebuild what they had in Jerusalem, the Holy Land, and the struggles that they have with that. And they're kind of 3 distinctly different books. But this particular chapter is really interesting, and I really feel like sometimes as preachers we do a disservice to people if we don't give some of the like some people don't like to give the historical background, but otherwise you read this passage, the very first verse says, "Thus says the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have grasped, to subdue nations before him and strip kings of their robes and open doors before him, and the gates shall not be closed." If you don't know who Cyrus is, you might miss the whole, just his name being named here affects a lot of the understanding of what this is about. Cyrus, as Megan mentioned, was the ruler of the Babylonians, and Cyrus is the earliest known ruler of a kingdom who had essentially an emancipation proclamation. There's this thing called the Cyrus Cylinder that tours around the world, and it was actually in I got to see it in San Francisco when I was there for seminary. That it was a sort of a, I don't know, the size of a, I don't know why I'm thinking of this, the size of a salami, the size of a, you know, a loaf of bread maybe. And it was made of clay, and there was a proclamation, a decree on the outside of it, freeing the slaves, most of which, they didn't mention Jews by name, but the Jews were part of that group. So it's one of the pretty rare times that an outside culture talked about something that we have documented in the Bible. Interesting that this ruler, Cyrus, freed the slaves without any, there wasn't necessarily anybody, at least not documented, who came and says, you know, like with Moses, let my people go. That we don't know if that kind of happened. Cyrus has decided that this was in the best interest of the people to let them go back to their homeland. And so in this passage, Cyrus is being called by God, the anointed, and that his name will be carried out for all this time. And that's kind of interesting because Cyrus is not a Jew, doesn't, I don't know what God or gods or faith Cyrus might have followed, but Cyrus is being sort of named as a prophet, as an outsider prophet here, to the people of Israel, to the chosen people, to us. And so I think I like this, just the fact that Cyrus' name is mentioned. I mean, it seems like a little thing, but the fact that his name is mentioned as this anointed person says that there's no one outside of the kingdom of heaven that, I mean, you know, people who we may think would have no influence on who we are and how we live our lives of faith can make great influences on us. If Cyrus can be considered like a prophet. And so I think that plays into the gospel. We'll talk about that later. I'll refer back to this later, but those little mentions of, like, if you're preaching on this and you talk about Isaiah, you should know the history of Cyrus and why this one passage is kind of significant. And I think sometimes I don't like the lectionary, but to me it tweaks a lot of the time. But it definitely tweaks how we think, how I personally am approaching the gospel this week. And I'll talk about that again later on. But because of the whole reference to Cyrus, it's made me sort of twist my own understanding of how to read the gospel. So it's interesting. What do you think about the Isaiah?
No, go ahead.
No, I'm passing the buck. I'm passing the baton. What do you think about Isaiah?
Well, I was gonna say, so there's a couple things in the text that are interesting to me, and again, I have foggy brain, but one is that sometimes we think that the first time that God reaches out to people kind of beyond the Israelites or the Canaanites is when Jesus is encountered by the Syrophoenician woman, the one who says that she wants her daughter healed, and Jesus calls her a female dog. And the woman responds by saying, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs. And this is seen kind of as a big turning point where Jesus is for people beyond the kind of known kingdom. So the fact that Cyrus appears in this text is a major hint that this Yahweh God is one that also reached out beyond borders, right? If God can love someone in Southeast Asia way before Jesus came, then that's a much longer theme, regardless of whether or not Jesus was good at it. And so I think that's a very interesting thing to think about. The other thing that I think about right now, particularly because of what's happening in our world, we have a president who militarily is very outgoing and imperialist, and this is a Bible text that affirms that kind of military strategy. So the kind of military strategy that Donald Trump is up to, where you are you prove that you're tough and you believe that God is going to save you and help you conquer your enemies, is a military strategy that comes out of biblical texts like this one in Isaiah. And I think it's helpful to talk about that because sometimes, particularly in our current society, it's really easy to discount people and say that, well, the only way to be a part of good news is to agree with my very liberal progressive ideologies. Whereas we need to always be remembering that if I'm going to argue justice and I'm going to argue politics, that there are just as many Bible texts that those who I'm going to spend my whole life working against are going to use working their whole life against my ideas. And I bring that up to remind us kind of the diversity of God's love. I think there are more texts that tell people how to not be a jerk when someone is loved by God that they don't think should be loved by God than there are texts that tell you that you're forgiven. I don't know if that's really true, but someday I'll make an intern count or something. I don't have the energy for that. But so this militaristic text is talking about God subduing people, and the verb in the Hebrew, thank you to Feasting on the Word, the word in Hebrew that's being used to talk about this military victory is radad, which means to beat down and stomp flat. So this isn't just like God bringing military victory. It's not like just enough victory so that those who need justice can have their place in the world and have enough dignity. This is a passage that is about genocide to the people who are against you, right? And so the Bible is good at saying God is all in with you. God's all in. Justice-wise, God is all in to try to save you. God's all in. The difficulty is that does not make us individuals who are able to say thank you or listen to the next group of people who are in need once our need is taken care of. Biblically, we are only trained to be people who are so all in on justice that we don't stop until everyone who disagrees with us is genocide.
That's
not cool.
I'm gonna make a little, not that I don't disagree with you, but I think part of the reason that that the military might of Cyrus is mentioned here is it seems like a contradiction that in this whole thing talking about the woes of the chosen people that have been enslaved in Babylon would suddenly raise up this king who has a lot of power and has invaded other countries and stuff. Well, why is the writer of Isaiah now saying, hey, here's to Cyrus, right? Look how great Cyrus is when he does have all this power and he has done all these things. But I think sometimes maybe it's partly in spite of his power, he still has this, like I said, historically documented moment of justice, right? Moment of I'm gonna free these people, and there's a connection toward in verses 4 and 5 of this passage of the chosen people that are called by name, and how essentially the might of Cyrus almost justifies their being let go, because he could have done anything with them. So yeah, I'm not going to deny that there's parts of it that look a little bit, more than a little bit, genocidal. But I know that this passage is here because This is the moment in the life of the writer where the people were freed from captivity.
Yes, but freed from captivity in a way that is like the annoying ants that are on my desk right now. Right? There are ants that are on my desk right now, and they're oppressing me by bugging me, right? And I love all the creatures of the world. Technically, I declare myself a pacifist, but I shouldn't, because I know the only reason to stop having ants pester me is to get rid of all of them, right? And then you have to get rid of any trace that they left behind so that more ants don't come and follow the like chemical scent trail that they left to show other people how to get to my desk, even though there's no food on it. Paper clips are not food, ants, right? So this is a text that's about smushing completely people like ants. And yay that it's on our side, and hooray that we are victorious and that God saves us. But this is one of those passages, and words like Radad are part of just war doctrines, which is a type of ethical and philosophical conversation about if war can ever be ethical and good for people. Barack Obama had the chutzpah to accept a peace prize, the Nobel Peace Prize, while delivering a speech about how just war is, right? So, and it's a good speech. If you want to understand what just war is, that would be a good speech to listen to, because he definitely needed to research it, because he was in the midst of like 4 different wars at the time he's getting a peace prize, right? But I bring that up now to just mention that, like, even sometimes in the texts that we think are for us, where it's like, God's all in, God's going to protect you, woohoo! There are these little nuances, little words, even in the Hebrew, even if it doesn't translate in the English version that we have, that like slipped in there, stuff that we still might want to talk about from a justice perspective. It's not the most important thing to talk about during the day, but it's just something to know that if people wanted to research more about that Hebrew word or learn more about just war doctrine, that you can.
Well, one of the most, I think for me, one of the most insidious passages that comes up often in the Bible, that really bothers me, but we sort of, that we ignore, is language that says we are the chosen people in a general sort of a way, and it's not that God doesn't love us or whatever, and I don't want to be, I'm universalist to a certain degree. I don't know.
As long as we're clear at the beginning of this conversation that we're not being anti-Semitic, and that's not what you're saying, I say proceed. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely not.
Because I know you well enough to know that's not what you're saying. But so I just wanted to say that for those who might not.
Not at all. But so the chosen people language, the problem with the chosen people language is it does exactly kind of what you're saying. It who's in and somebody who's out, somebody who's on one side of the line, somebody who's on the other side of the line. And the problem with this Isaiah passage is it kind of draws a line. Now, I'm curious historically, and I don't know that we know the answer to that, if the Babylonians and the Jews are on one side of the line, who's on the other side of the line? Who is the, right? Because I'm not sure you can really historically say it's the people that have stayed in Israel and the Canaanites and the Philistines, all that. Maybe it's another kingdom, but I don't know that I just don't know. I don't know who would be on the other side of that line at this point in their history. Is my point.
Yeah.
Of course, there's always another kingdom, somebody to oppress, another society to attack or enslave or whatever. Of course, but I just don't know historically who that is in this passage, because earlier in Isaiah, it was the Babylonians against the Jews. It was here are these people that are taking us, and look how horrible our lives are going to be under this slavery in this foreign land. And in this passage, they are united in a way. Maybe they're united in not necessarily a positive way, but they're united. So, I mean, it's just worth thinking about who's the other in this passage. I mean, because
Right.
maybe the other exists, but I just don't know who the other is in this passage.
Moabites.
Right. Okay.
That's my. So if you've ever read the book of Isaiah, you know that the best joke that runs through, it's not really it's not funny because it's about slaughtering them. But for me, what I think is hysterical when you read the book of Isaiah, even at the like noblest of noble, like when Isaiah is writing about like God's justice is so wonderful. You saved every single person. He can't do it. He can't do it. He can't go all the way to God loves everybody. Every single time, Isaiah will add the following sentence. And if it's not in the like clipped reading for that Sunday, it's like in the Bible, just the next sentence. And it'll be like, suffer the Moabites. They're terrible. We hate them. Right? Or like everyone's going to be saved, but the Moabites will be stuck in dung. Like it's this, it's kind of, for me, it's an ongoing hypocrisy.
Well, it's kind of like it's like the Samaritans all throughout the Gospels. The Samaritans get brought up as the other, as the enemy, time and time and time again in the Gospels. And I think it's the woman at the well story where I had sort of a revelation this last that the woman at the well says, well, our ancestor Jacob says we're supposed to worship on in this place and on the mountain, and you say you're supposed to worship. It went, well, hold on a second, isn't Jacob both of their ancestor? Like they have this.
Yeah, but they disagreed on which mountain was the transfiguration as well. It was the one to the left or the one to the right.
Right. My point is this whole all throughout the Gospels, the Samaritans are the other, the dirty other that's unclean, that's horrible, that doesn't know how to worship, and yet they have a common ancestry. And
yes, of course. But siblings never get along.
Oh, right. But my point is that the other's never as much an other as people want them to be, as people expect them to be. Like the most othered in the Gospels is the Samaritans, and technically they're not the other in some ways, which is just interesting. So I don't know how that pertains to the Moabites, but no matter what, the gospel writers, not the gospel writers, the writers of any of the books of the Bible come up with an other, come up with somebody to be the foil. It just happens.
Yes, there's no person in the Bible. Excuse me. There's no person in the Bible that doesn't hate someone else.
Right.
Oofta.
Well, Jesus is mad at
look at the Matthew text from today.
Does he hate the
Jesus is calling people broods of vipers. Jesus says, get behind me, Satan. Jesus says it's not what goes into your mouth, but it's the fact that you poop out words. Right?
Does he hate them though? I don't know.
You need to Google Jesus and whips.
Oh yeah, I know that passage.
If you've seen those paintings, they're nuts bonanzas. Like, come on. It only happens in one of the 4 Gospels that Jesus gets so angry that he starts hitting people with whips. Like, okay. Just saying.
I didn't say he doesn't get mad. He gets mad a lot of the time.
And I'm not saying that the people Jesus is mad at don't deserve it. Like the opening text in this Matthew reading is the Pharisees went to plot against him and entrap him, and they do clearly try to get him murdered unjustly, is at least the way the text is and the story is framed. So it's not like he's wrong to be mad, but
they try to entrap him over and over and over again.
Jesus, aware of their malice, says, you're putting me to test, you hypocrites. Which I don't know about you, but there's a lot of people that bug the crap out of me. Probably no one bugs the crap out of Dan, but there's a lot of people that bug the crap out of me. And do you know how mad I would have to be before I would call them a hypocrite to their face? Like, real mad. Like in a letter, maybe. I mean, we've all written emails and deleted them. or wished we deleted them and didn't send them, right? But like, you got to be pretty mad to call somebody a hypocrite to their face in a public forum, and they're your boss. Like so, because Jesus was a rabbi, right? So imagine all the pastors in town. All the pastors in town want to ask you a question because you're getting like more people at worship than everybody else, and they're trying to ask you a question. And at like the town hall meeting, when they ask you a question, you go, "You guys are hypocrites." How do you think that's going to go at the next rabbi meeting? It's not going to go well, right? Like, this is not about reconciliation and compassion. This is like, if Jesus was our colleague, oh my goodness, Jesus would have been the worst. Like, hooray, save my soul going to heaven, right? But like, if Jesus was the pastor at the church next door, my goodness. Imagine, Jesus sounds like kind of a jerky boss too to the disciples. I'm not saying they don't deserve it, but if someone did that now, come on.
Yeah, he's pretty consistently a jerk. I mean, I think that he is. He just is.
He just is.
He just is.
Get it? I am.
It's just to the Pharisees. I'm like, it's not just to the Pharisees. He's a jerk to the disciples sometimes. He's it happens. By the way, I don't know if we mentioned this. We've sort of organically transitioned from Isaiah to the gospel without even mentioning it. We're already talking about the gospel. So if you're not following that, we're there. We're in Matthew.
Transition ninja. I shouldn't overexert myself, because I should really be wearing my mask because of the forest fire air, but I'm not, and that's why I'm coughing. Sorry.
That's okay.
Because I think doing Bible study like this is creepy. Does it? It looks creepy, right? Yeah. I'm just saying.
You look kind of like a cool ninja, though, too.
Oh yeah, my ninja transitions, segues. All right, back to Matthew, guys. So this is a time when Jesus kind of masterfully uses wordplay in a way that just gets somebody. And I think this text is one that people remember, because if you have ever like had someone say something dumb to you and then you go home and you're like, oh, I wish I would have said blah, 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 blah. Like, this is one of those texts where Jesus was like, bam, right? And got it right. Who knows how Jesus felt afterwards? Jesus's feelings aren't usually in the text, but this is like they're trying to trick Jesus into saying something bad about the political leaders so that they can get him in trouble faster. And instead, Jesus, through rabbi ninja words, is able to basically separate church and state in a way by saying, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, give to God what is God. Now, every rabbi in the room knows everything is God's. And so who cares about these dumb coins that we're arguing about? It's not answering the question. It's not as slippery as a politician who's like, well, that's an interesting question. Do you know what else is interesting? Let me tell you about my tax reform policy. All right? It's not as slippery as a politician, but it's genius, right? Because Jesus is able to get out of the conversation. Jesus is choosing his own adventure and picking the timing that works better for what's about to happen. And gets to like leave the party being like, yeah, that's right. I won that one. And I love the like way it's described. Like, the answer was so good, even those who were trying to trick him were impressed. Like, yeah, that was a great comeback, Jesus.
If you just read the first sentence and the last sentence, the first verse, then the Pharisees went and plotted, I love that word, plotted to entrap him in what he said. And then the last verse, when they heard this, they were amazed and they left him and went away. So the people that are trying to entrap him were so amazed. They're like, okay, we're done. I was in a Bible study.
But they don't change their mind. They go plot somewhere else. But they were like, yeah, well done, kid.
Yeah, we can't get him this time. I was in a Bible study this morning where someone else in the Bible study said, you know, the interesting thing about
Bible study slut.
Yeah, I'm a Bible study slut. I'm bounced from one to the other. One of the things that was said was Jesus has this way of not of not taking sides but still taking sides. Like they're trying to entrap him by getting him to. I don't know. Did I say this before we were on the air or after?
It's hard to remember.
I'm tired too. About if you draw a line in the sand, Jesus is usually on the other side. If you choose which side is right and which side is wrong, and you put yourself on one side, Jesus is usually on the other side. And Jesus has an amazing way of, when they're trying to get him to be on one side or the other, he avoids that entirely, but not without putting them in a position to think about where they were on whatever the issue was. Like if Jesus doesn't go, oh well, if Jesus were to come here, he'd be a Democrat, or if Jesus were to come here, he'd be a Republican, or no, Jesus would come and say, well, Jesus, are you a Democrat or a Republican? And then he'd say a parable and walk away, and you're like,
or he'd be like, give to elephants what are elephants, and give to donkeys what are donkeys, right? Like,
and you'd be like, well, okay,
who cares? Yeah.
So part of the reason that I mentioned earlier that I like the way that this Isaiah text is tied in with his gospel is, we sometimes want to decide who the enemies are. Well, my enemy is so and so, or this group of people, or anybody who does this. The Isaiah previous to that, Cyrus and the Babylonians are the bad guys, and suddenly they're not. And so I think we have a bad habit of trying to, even though we say we don't, especially pastors often will say, oh no, there's the people are loved in a general way, right? All people are beloved children of God. We still have this. We're still guilty of this. Who's in and who's out? Who's going to heaven? Who's going to hell? Who's right and who's wrong? Kind of language. And both of these things kind of say, to me, the combination of the Isaiah and the gospel text say, don't stop trying to decide who's in. This isn't about who's in and who's out. And even the talk about the coin is not just about coins and money. Sometimes pastors will often use this as a stewardship jumping off point to say, hey, so pay your taxes, but so also give money to the church. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but it also is talking about Jesus isn't saying you should only give money you should only put your energy and your time and your money into the church, or you should only focus on the outside world. Jesus is saying both are valid, and there's no good or bad side. There's no people who you think are your enemies probably still have God with them, comforting them, and that's a hard lesson. I think that's part of the step here. Is this is breaking. Jesus so often in his parables basically breaks down the idea that the world is black and white. Jesus keeps promoting this sort of gray area that we're all more alike than we are different. And I think there's some of that in this. That quit trying to separate these, who's loved and who's not loved, or whether or not we should pay fealty to the empire, or we should pay fealty to the church, one or the other. Yeah, both. How about both? We often talk of Lutherans as being both and. This is a both and passage, right? This is one of those times when Jesus is saying, you should commit to being a part of the world, and you should commit to being a part of your faith. It's not one or the other. It's not just about money.
It's not just about money, and we know that too from the Thessalonians reading. The Thessalonians reading talks about the message of the gospel being about more than just words. It's about power, or dunamai, which is the Greek word, which is what Jesus has in the Gospel of Mark that makes it possible for Jesus to heal other people and to do things that transform the world more justly. That the Holy Spirit comes and proves people to be consistent, right, and faithful. So you might be questioned in the short term, but because you are consistent, people will understand you as much based on your being the same. And there's a phrase that people in the nonviolence community talk about that is the way of kind of weathering trolls. Before there was Twitter, there were trolls. And the idea is that when you are trying to do something that is good and sound and just, but everyone thinks what you're up to is terrible and horrible and destructive or unhelpful, like in the way that some nonviolent protests in the short term might like block traffic. And then, so how do you respond to that? The phrase that people use for how you will change hearts and minds through these kind of actions that can in the short term bug people and annoy people is to have consistency in action, right? Integrity in small things lead to integrity in big things, meaning you can't be known as someone who steals all the pens from work and then be trusted if someone thinks that there's money missing from an account, right? And so the idea is that if throughout your life you are in all of the day-to-day tasks, proving yourself to be trustworthy and good news oriented. And that doesn't just mean like showing, that means not just showing up for like hospice visits when someone is at the end of their life, but like texting nice things throughout the day and checking in on people and being known as someone who generally is good-willed and good-natured. Not perfect, like we're all going to be grumpy and we're all going to be hungry sometimes and we're all going to need more sleep sometimes. But the goal of Christian life is not only knowing the right words, and particularly as Lutherans, it's not about knowing the right words at all, because we believe that Jesus is the golden ticket to get into the Willy Wonka factory, right? Jesus, as Thessalonians says, rescues us from the wrath that is coming. There's no part of that process that requires us to behave. But when we are consistently ethical, consistently loving, continuously praying without ceasing, then we are known to be people who people can tell are striving for helpful things in the world rather than terrible things in the world. And I recommend that to anyone who faces bullies or trolls or just gets annoyed when people don't understand them because you sometimes say the wrong thing at a party like I do, that people will notice, right? And I've noticed this because I've had times where like people will write, here's a formal letter that I'm mad about the color of the carpet in the narthex, right? And I, as a pastor, have sometimes thought, oh no, everyone hates me because one person wrote a letter about how they didn't like the color of the carpet in the narthex. And then later, when I meet with people and I'll have a meal with them, which is something I regularly do with those who are interested, they'll say, I just want you to know, Pastor, that when someone came to me and said how mad they were about the carpet in the narthex, I said, I love Pastor Megan. Pastor Megan always comes and eats with me and checks in on me and is consistent with me. And so I decided I didn't need to weigh in on whether you were a good person or a bad person because of the color of the narthex, because your consistency of showing up is what is useful for me in my life. And I made up that example about carpet in the narthex, obviously, but I've had a lot of experiences where I wonder if people are mad at me because I did something or I didn't say it the exact right way. And then if I wait longer, people will then reaffirm me and say, no, like you always show up for this. And that's what's most important. And so I recommend to other people who are feeling anxious or feeling like the world's against them to know that it takes longer for people to tell you they noticed you're consistent than it does for people to be mad about really easy, quick, surfacey things. And the people who notice your consistency, those compliments will mean way more to you than surface compliments about like, oh, Pastor, we think you lost weight, or whatever your sermon was really great today. People who say, I have noticed that you go out above and beyond all the time to try to do these great things. And I just wanted you to know that I noticed. That those people who who notice your consistency or long-term efforts are the ones that really you should try to stick to your ribs more than the ones that are the fastest to make you grumpy. So I just thought I'd say that about the Thessalonians. Yeah.
For every one sincere sort of compliment, someone who really sees you, you get 10 complaints or insincere things. So yeah, I think they're way heavier. I read a book that I can't remember the title of, but I will make sure that this comes on the thing here below, by Marcus Borg, who unfortunately passed away about a year and a half ago. Fantastic writer. And one thing that came out of that with the Thessalonians is that this book has it has the New Testament. It's basically a copy of the New Testament, but it comes in chronological order from when it was written. And each chapter there's about 5 or 6 chapters ahead of time that sort of say the rationale behind that. And then each chapter has a pretty lengthy introduction as to why that's important and how to read the New Testament in a different way. And First Thessalonians was, according to him, the first book chronologically written in the New Testament. And I like that a lot for a couple of reasons. One is, First Thessalonians in my Bible is 2 pages. It's pretty short. But Paul is sort of, I feel like in Thessalonians in a general way, Paul is sort of searching and thinking about this new conversion a bit. So it's an interesting book to sort of, you get some conviction in a positive way, but you also get some flexibility in thinking about what it means to believe and how to walk this faith. But the other thing that I really love about reading the Bible, the New Testament in that way, is and it sounds
it's called evolution of the word. Sorry to interrupt. Yep, you're welcome.
It's fantastic. The other thing I really love about this is when you read the New Testament this way, the New Testament is organized. First of all, the Gospels come first. Paul's epistles go by how long they are, which is not the order that they were written. First Thessalonians, for instance, when Paul mentions the gospel, as he does in this passage, he mentions the gospel came to you in word only. This is verse 5, but also in power in the Holy Spirit and with full conviction. Paul is not talking about the written books of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and the other gospels that existed in his time. There were 9 of them, at least, maybe more. Paul is talking about that story of who Jesus was and these things like we talked about in this story in Matthew, the way that Jesus influenced people, both people that he loved and people that he had conflict with. And so to me, just the word gospel means more to me when Paul says it, because what he's meaning literally is the good news. So Paul is talking about the good news of Jesus Christ, and good news in the way that it's defined. This is good news of who Jesus was and how that affects who we are now. I think when I was a kid, when I was an adult, before seminary, I thought of this as, well, he's talking about, when he says we brought the gospel to you, we brought you the book of Matthew or the book of John or whatever. That didn't happen. It wasn't like he physically brought a book and said, hey, read this book. This is really good. This talks about Jesus. What he's talking about is this story of good news. I have kind of a soft spot on my heart for First Thessalonians of all books, because it's kind of like an introduction to what the rest of the New Testament is going to be about. And in some ways, Paul's theology changes a little bit throughout his letters. In First Thessalonians, in the earlier writings, he had this idea that Jesus would come back within his lifetime. And so
sure.
when Paul talks about marriage in his epistles, for instance, that's one example. In his earlier epistles, he says, don't get married, sell all you have, because it doesn't matter, because Jesus is coming back tomorrow, as one of my seminary professors said, next Tuesday. It was always next Tuesday. Jesus coming back next Tuesday. So there's no point in doing any of those long-term things. And so people read that with a modern context and go, well, what is he talking about? If you understand the way his theology changes over time, by the end of his writings, which is only about a decade later, he's saying, be constant. Yes, you should get married, for instance. You should save. You should wait for the Lord, that sort of thing. So his theology kind of shifts a little bit. And there's something in that too, that if Paul, who was an amazing writer and said some really amazing things and said some really horrible things too, if Paul can grow in his faith noticeably in the New Testament, in his epistles, then we have some license to do that too. So this is the beginning of his thoughts. This is the beginning of his writings as we have them. And if you read them in chronological order, if you read The Evolution of the Word by Marcus Borg, you can sort of see that. And so, especially, and this is the beginning of 1 Thessalonians. So he's setting up what he's going to say and what, the gospel. So even some of the gospels were inspired by some of what Paul said and did. And I think some of that's here. So this is kind of a neat little passage, I think. Anyway.
Yay!
So
that was a great unpacking of that. And then if you want something a little bit more cheery, you can check out the psalm reading for this week. Let the heavens be glad. Let the earth rejoice. Let the sea roar and all that fills it. Let the field exult in everything in it. We're doing Creation Sundays here at Grace Lutheran. And so if you stop by on Sunday, we'll be doing things that are tilted a bit towards the creation of the world. And that's kind of fun. So choose your own adventure. You can have a grumpy Jesus text. You can have an Isaiah text about a ruler who killed a bunch of people in Southeast Asia. You can have a text about just about everything. That was very oversimplified. But
I don't think we disagree with our approach as much this week as we did last week.
Yeah, last week was fun. We were also, when we're less sleepy, it's easier to have a pretend argument as well. But Pastor Dan and I adore each other, so it works out. Although maybe I'll just speak for myself. I adore Pastor Dan. Dan can have whatever feelings.
I adore Pastor Megan so much.
Oh, best friends forever.
Wait, I don't know how to do that thing. Wait, look.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I don't do that very often.
And thank you everyone who listened all the way to the end. Shout out to Stephanie if you made it. Good to see you. Hope everybody's doing well. Stay safe. Stay sane.
Who's Stephanie?
She sends me prayers at least once a week for my ministry and stuff that's happening. And awesome. She watches our Bible studies. Hi, Stephanie.
Hi, Stephanie. Nice to meet you.
Yeah. Anyway. Yeah. Yeah. Bye, everybody.